Longthorpe Legion, and we badge as the 9th Legion, which was when it came to Britain, was tasked with moving up the eastern side of the country, including coming through Norfolk. The 9th Legion is an organisation of the 1st century Roman Imperial Army, about 5,200 heavy infantry soldiers. That invasion force had an initial objective of Londinium or Colchester, and after that the legions were given different tasks. And it's the 9th that came up the eastern side of the country, meaning they came through Norfolk. They would have liaised quite heavily and were greeted initially quite warmly by the Iceni. They had been pro-Roman for quite a while, but things took a turn for the worst fairly shortly after. By 47, we read of the Roman writers reporting of a revolt by the Iceni tribe because of the Roman desire to disarm them and take away their swords. They were providing the peace and security as they saw it, and the local tribes didn't need to be armed. This didn't go down well, but ultimately didn't have a massive impact on the wider status of Romano-Britain. By that point, the 9th Legion had established at least 2 forts, one at Longthorpe, which is where we get my group name from, which is just outside Peterborough. The fort actually lies underneath Thorpewood Golf Course. That had been established by 47 at the time of this revolt. But it's the subsequent Boudican revolt that really has most people's knowledge and enthusiasm based around it. That took place about 60-61 AD, and it was as a result primarily, so as we believe, of some loans that had been made to the local tribespeople that they didn't actually want, and on the death of Prasutagus, all those loans suddenly being recalled. There was also an attempt by Seneca the Younger and the procurator, I can't remember the name of, basically colluding to try and defraud the Iceni of the rights of the tribal leadership. Prasutagus in his will had left half of his kingdom to the Roman emperor and half to his 2 daughters. The Roman officials decided if they applied Roman law, the daughters were ineligible, with being female, they were ineligible to inherit, and so they were going to try and make a grab for the entire kingdom. They sent the army in. They did some quite, I don't want to get into it, but it's quite horrible things to the Roman nobles, and particularly Prasutagus' daughters, and as a result there was a foment of genuine dissatisfaction, not only amongst the Iceni tribe but also the Trinovantes. Again, these tribes had been pro-Roman, but were very, very quick to rise against Roman rule. But we also need to understand, I believe, that this wasn't so much an organised military revolt against Roman military oppression as it was a general rising against the authorities as they saw it, defrauding them. There were significant proportions of this uprising who were only interested in loot, booty, rioting, and it's something that is unfortunately all too familiar in societies, particularly recently in this country. The Boudican revolt centres its ire against Colchester, Londinium. It's seen as the centre of Roman power. It does, after all, become the first capital of Roman Britain, and so Boudica's revolt very much heads in that direction. It holds out, as we understand, for 3 days, particularly centred around the temple. This was also a colonia where veteran soldiers had been given their plots of land as part of their retirement package. They were very well versed in use of weapons and defending themselves, so the temple, being stone, held out for the longest, but eventually it was overrun, and Colchester even today has a stratification layer that's completely black. Subsequent to that, the axis really heads towards Londinium. Now, I believe, and I can only speak from my own feelings on how I think this might have played out, that this was an attempt to gain the Roman military grain supply, which might well have been in Londinium, being the centre of a lot of the trade was coming in through that as a port. Nobody had stayed behind, as we understand it, to collect the harvest amongst the tribespeople, which meant they needed that grain to survive over the next winter. It quickly became apparent that it was likely that the grain supply, or the bulk of it, was with the military on campaign. They were fortuitously on the other side of the country. But the lead elements of that army had already made it back. They'd heard about the problems. The 9th Legion had marched out from Longthorpe and lost half of its infantry as a result of this uprising to try and relieve Colchester. But the lead elements of the rest of the army had reached Londinium and been able to warn the people, saying, look, these people are coming, they will butcher you if you stay. So whoever could get out got out, but London suffered the same fate. But then it takes a different axis. It heads towards Verulamium, or St Albans, which is entirely a different direction, suggesting that if they hadn't discovered the grain supply in Londinium, maybe they realised they needed to capture it from the Roman military. Which is why they change axis and head up pretty much along the A5 or Watling Street, and what follows is often referred to the Battle of Watling Street. It's unclear as to where this took place. There are several places along that line that claim that the battle happened there, but in truth we just don't know, and until some significant archaeology comes to light, again, we won't ever likely find out. Suffice to say that the lack of organised military ambition with this uprising comes to the fore at this point. Boudica either being badly advised or showing colours as not actually a military leader, falls into the trap of facing the Roman army in an organised battle. And even worse, she lets the Roman commander choose where that battle takes place. He does so very carefully, counteracting with the terrain whatever numerical superiority she might have. The Roman writers say that 80,000 tribespeople are slaughtered that day, but it's unlikely to have been anywhere near that number. It would be massively inflated by the Roman writers to make out the Roman army as invincible and heroes. It's good PR for them. The truth is we just don't know, but even if we reduce it by a factor of 10 and say 8,000 died, that is still a massive impact on a population of the scale that existed in Britain at the time. I think most estimates I've seen for the population of Britain at the time was about 2.5 million at most. So this is a massive battle. Even by today's standard, a single battle resulting in 8,000 casualties would be seen as disastrous. The subsequent actions that follow mean that there is retribution carried out, and there is famine across most of what's now East Anglia, particularly in Norfolk and Suffolk. There would be mass starvation, and again added to that, retribution by the Roman military. It was a pretty harsh time, but what comes out of it, we believe, are a series of governors that come to Britain in the following decade who seek to weed out corruption and deal with the local people more equitably. No longer do you have to live in your thatched roundhouse. You've only got to look at places like Fishbourne Palace to see the sort of lifestyle that could be on offer for those who collaborate, collude or adopt Roman style. The villas that we unearth with their mosaic floors and beautiful wall paintings would be typical. We see them all over the southern Britain. It's a sea change in the lifestyle of people. For the Romano-British, they do valiantly try to continue this, but there's an increase in migration with the Roman army being withdrawn in the early 5th century or being sent on its way. And despite militias trying to be raised and organised to defend against and step up in migration, we then run into the Anglo-Saxon period, which is probably just as sophisticated, and is made of people not looking to destroy what's here, but to get a piece of the action. They want part of this, because as I said, it's the best it's ever been for people. Unfortunately, they don't know how to maintain the towns. They don't know how to maintain things like aqueducts, the wells and things like that in the same way that the Romans did and the Roman culture did, and it's not their culture anyway. Often they have come from northern Germany and southern Scandinavia, and particularly in places like Norfolk and Suffolk, which become East Anglia under the Angles, they have a different culture and they go back to living in wooden built villages. The Dark Ages really is a misnomer. They have a fantastically sophisticated culture. that has enough surplus in it to allow specialisation. The ship burial at Sutton Hoo is evidence of the sophistication of somebody who made those beautiful plus ironwork brooches and things. But really that is the end of Romano Britain. Its days are numbered, but it's largely by intermarriage and migration than it is by conquest.